You keep it off the record, consequently you can keep your record clear. And if you mute the speech that shakes your frail beliefs, you only seek to insulate your image and continue down the stream in the direction clout and credit steers. Directly from your mouth into am I the asshole Reddit's ears. Directly back into the greasy pockets of some Gates Foundation financiers. And then directly back into the frantic final thoughts of early trial Neuralink volunteers, staring at the numb and mumbling vacancies where recently had been their peers. Half of whom are glitching with the memory stuck on pause, and half have zero fucking clue just who they are or why they're here. It's been said that fear is all we have to fear, but that was back before the Basosphere condenser came along, distilling concentrated fear that's diamond pure, crystal clear, oppressor strong, and woven into every single article you read and song they let you hear. And then Elon heard that Jeff enhanced our fears by 86%, and he said, hold my beer. And not a single sheep among the herd would turn their head or say a word, cause they were all too busy begging for the shears, begging for the muzzle, happy just to guzzle, feed, and watch a screen for all their years. Man, to each his own, can't afford a home, but they'll let you have your cozy little ecosphere, where there among your own devices you can break the seventh seal, overthrow the oracles and slay the seer. All the tomes were burned and all the lips were seared. Shut your eyes and all our lives just disappear. Now blink them twice. Welcome to your ecosphere. Of the free, and you'll know us by the trail of dead. It's just one more world war to complete the set. When you live by the pike, you die by the pith. You die wide-eyed, still pleading the fifth, or crying divine epithets and pathetic attempts at defense. All empathetic for those on your side of the fence. Well, I'll gladly put you and your legacy into an alternate tense of faltering senses and altered events. Like hun, it ain't a hearse, it's a reaper's stretch. How sweet, she said, bunch of hordes in the street like it's Evil Dead, where the thin blue line meets razor's edge, and where the corporate ladder ascends to a steel-toed boot that awaits on the ledge. You'll be licking it fresh at your boss's request till it stomps each finger and watches you fall to your death and drown in an ocean of debt. Gone with the fodder who gathered to honor the patient left, who purity tested themselves into sections, step by step, till the next election, when it's just one them and the sound of their well-read theorized breath. That's harm reduction for the lowly cost of you holding your nose and just openly buying the theft. Maybe that's all in the flick of the pen. Maybe we're all one unmarked van from a trip to the pen, being guarded by pigs who exist on a diet of dying breaths of much worthier men. Honey, heaven's expecting you. Just don't get too hung up on who they let in. Just look up at the shine of the pearly gates. You don't need to worry if there's lead in the paint. You don't need to worry if there's lead in the water, lead in the milk, lead in the honey, lead in the caustic embrace of the Heavenly Father. Lead is the flavor of passive perpetual slaughter. Lead is the taste of us led to the ledge by the lure of the legend of expert consensus, and then beckon to stretch it just one step farther. And I hope all the folks who were boastfully gloating and toasting themselves as the heroes of COVID for boosting their boosters and doing their part are now equally thrilled to be starstruck martyrs, all laid in a government grave with anonymous markers, like you're back from the carvers and off to the splicer. You're the very first wave to be slain in the war against Pfizer, that 100 years war against Pfizer. They are thinning the crowd that is striking right now to bleed adequate pay from those inhuman misers who all sit in their office and designate coffins to people regarded as nothing but profit for Kaiser. Still the Dems want you nicer. Dems want you softer, Dems want you kinder. Yeah, they all want you graciously starving in silence. You will speak when you're spoken to. Rest of the time, you and all of us peasants are merely depressing statistics neglected in Congress's binders. All bled, bone dry, then fed to the grinder. Our headstones line each step as reminders. That's a lesson in object permanence learned in the furnace by workers consigned to the fire. Workers bled, bone dry, then fed by the fed to the grinder. Fed by the fed to the grinder. Now the Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide in your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You let it inside, and you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. Now the Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide in your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You let it inside, and you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. And the Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide in your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You let it inside, you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, bleeds you dry, then dines on the dead. The Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide in your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You let it inside, and you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. Here's where our leaders would see us all led. Here's where our leaders would see us all led. Here's where our leaders would see us all led. Here's where our leaders would see us all led. The Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide in your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You let it inside, you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide in your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You let it inside, you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your mind, that it grinds yourself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. Here's where our leaders would see us all led.
Legend says that Hercules swept Cerberus right off his feet and effortlessly set him down softly as a songbird. Atlas kept the world upon his back, and every day wondered whether he could stand it any longer. And Reade came out to say the man they tried to label the Messiah of morality was really just another rapist. And I don't intend to hesitate when asked who was the stronger. Tara, like Assange, knew that carrying the truth would be the hardest labor. Tara knew that her assailant wasn't gonna make us any safer, and knew he's just the type of man to hand a decent foreign leader US printed walking papers, and knew he'd be relentless and aggressive in the war he'd wage upon her very character, that his attempts to weaken and degrade and embarrass her would be her only compensation. But I strongly doubt that anyone could ever have foreseen the stream of hate that came from quote-unquote progressives. and the self-styled titans of survivor advocation. So if you really think there's something to be gained out of sharing your pain with the world, you are sorely mistaken. The Biden team just dragged their feet addressing Tara's allegations. Until they had a decent list of smears, then they aired them out on every station. And it turns out no one wants to hear the truth of who they praised as being worthy of such bloated liberal celebration. That no one wants to really know the person they've so valiantly defended, even when it meant they had to gloat and shit all over someone braver than they'd be if given the occasion. Now cue the faceless comment squad invasion. Cue those fuckers crawling out the woodwork to come analyze the way you wore your hair and what you wear. Like your appearance waives your rights, or that somehow you're the reason for your situation. Somehow they've decided you should bear responsibility for what such monstrous men insist on doing. Somehow they're deluded by the empty, hypocritical, and useless fucking platitudes that bastard keeps on spewing. And I think it's very telling that the best of their excuses when they try to come and justify our president's abuses is a hearty butt Trump. In which case I'll remind you that you never saw the news attempt to sell us Donald Trump like he was morally upstanding or a decent human. But when Joe says something bigoted or ogles someone's little kid, CNN says, isn't this refreshing? Biden's like a mix of JFK and FDR with all the finer parts of Harry Truman. Christ, I know that they don't think that we're the brightest, but at least pretend we got a couple lumens. Ask yourself if you have ever questioned what they fed you, or do you just shut your eyes and then consume it? And now ask yourself if you ate every one of Biden's lies under guise of harm reduction and the promise of a slight improvement. And now imagine long ago that Biden chose to show you who he really was by traumatizing you for his amusement. Now imagine that you watched him touch a Bible with those filthy hands, and then assume the power of the highest seat in all the land, of knowing your attacker wields a global coalition born of three-letter agencies who'll make a life's mission out of trying to discredit you through lies, damn lies, and collusion. Big tech is never gonna separate from our surveillance state. Fuck's sakes, they're just a breath away from total fusion. So there will come a time where even if you see the light, your voice will never reach the sky through all the bots and all the noise pollution. So trust us when we tell you that the masking of abuses is perhaps this country's oldest institution. And I know nothing nobler than facing it in honor of the truth when you know that the people holding power have been neutralizing truth since there was wet ink on the Constitution. So know that Tara's truth is something crucial to the movement. And if you see yourself a partner to the revolution, help this country see through all the baseless propaganda through the crux of Joe's illusions. And recognize that Tara Reade gave everything she had so she could tell us what the truth is. Recognize the decent thing to do when someone bears their soul and shows their bruises is not to ask for context or offer up your own solutions. Your job is just to listen with an honest mind and put yourself on Tara's side a moment so you understand the path she chooses. That there is no instant fame worth the dragging of your name. And if that's what you think, you've a lot to learn about the kind of facts the mob can handle and the kind that it refuses. You've a lot to learn about the news and all its many uses. Guess you've yet to learn the truth the news will serve as fruit from which they've squeezed out all the juices. And we all eat the husk and just pretend it's full of nutrients and isn't really useless.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Politics of Survival. I am your host, Tara Reade, and I have a really special show today and a guest that I really admire. He is a CIA whistleblower. He is also the co-host of Political Misfits. He's an award-winning author, a journalist. He's an amazing person. all around. John Kiriakou, thank you for coming to the show. So happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for that kind introduction. Happy to see you.
So here we are in this political point in history where we're on the verge of nuclear war. Our freedom of speech and freedom of press is at, the greatest threat it's ever been with the imprisonment of Julian Assange. And one of the things I wanted to mention in your intro was that you are a tireless and loud advocate of Julian Assange. So let's start there. And if you could lead in kind of with your whistleblowing and then what led you to being such a strong voice for Julian.
Well, thanks for that. Nobody has ever asked me why I'm a supporter of Julian Assange, and there's actually some background to it. So my own whistleblowing came as a result of my service in the CIA. I spent 15 years in the CIA, rose up quickly through the ranks. I was the chief of CIA counterterrorism operations in Pakistan after 9/11. I led the capture of Abu Zubaydah, who we believed at the time to be the number 3 in al-Qaeda. That turned out to not be true. I'm sad to say that I stood alone in my opposition to his torture and went public with that information in December of 2007. As you might imagine, the entire weight of the U.S. government fell on my head. And to make a very long story short, I ended up serving 23 months in a federal prison as a result of my whistleblowing. I have zero regrets, like literally zero regrets. And have advised other whistleblowers and would-be whistleblowers, especially involved in the national security, in what to do or not do. I urge them to not make the mistake that I made by waiting to hire an attorney. I tell whistleblowers that they should hire an attorney first, an attorney who is skilled in whistleblower defense, so that they have somebody sitting next to them, literally, when they decide to blow the whistle. In the beginning, Tara, I wasn't so much interested in Julian Assange. I had a little bit of a personal problem with Julian in that the initial cache of documents released to WikiLeaks by Chelsea Manning happened to include my social security number. There was an obscure cable in there about a trip that I was taking to the Middle East when I was working on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff. Mm-hmm. And as just part of the normal, travel standard operating procedure, I included my social security number, and that was leaked to WikiLeaks. Now, thank goodness nothing ever happened, but it kind of made me angry. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up going to prison a year later, or a couple of years later anyway. And when I got out, I got hired by the Greek government to help them write a new whistleblower protection law. So I connected with a woman by the name of Dr. Sulet Dreyfus, who is the founder of an NGO based in Australia called Blueprint for Free Speech. Well, Sulet, it turns out, was also the co-founder of WikiLeaks with Julian. They went back decades together in Australia. And we were out for a walk in Athens one day after having spent the day with the Ministry of Justice. And she said to me, "Why is it that you're not one of the big Julian Assange supporters? I never see you ever associated with Julian Assange." Again, this is 2015. And I said, "Well, to tell you the truth, I'm kind of mad that my social security number was leaked in that tranche of information. And I've heard from other people for whom I have great respect that Julian's got kind of a problem with women. And, I'm the father of a daughter. I wouldn't want anybody treating my daughter that way." And she said, "Well, I think that a lot of that just is simply not true. I think the police put these women up to that and blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera." So the more I looked into it, the more I thought, now this is far more complicated than I had realized that it was. And then talking to yet more people that I respect here in the Washington area, especially people involved in the issues of transparency and freedom of speech and freedom of the press, frankly, I came to realize that that in a way we're all, I don't mean to sound like a cliche, but in a way we're all Julian Assange. That if we don't stand up for Julian Assange, there's just not going to be anybody to stand up for us. And
Right.
if the government successfully prosecutes Julian Assange, who's not even an American citizen, by the way,
Right.
on charges under the Espionage Act, well, then certainly the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, any journalist involved in the national security is next. And once that precedent is set, the government can do anything it wants. So whatever differences I may have had with Julian Assange, I put behind me years ago. And I stand up for him just the same way that I know that he would stand up for me.
That's really interesting to hear. And as you're watching our the attacks under the Biden administration of our free speech, I'm sure you're well aware of how DOJ and CIA and FBI are all being pretty weaponized with this administration to suppress truth, like for instance with the Hunter Biden laptop.
Yeah.
And so I think WikiLeaks and Julian Assange's presence is greatly missed because, when the New York Post tried to raise it up, of course, they were censored. And I guess last Monday were disinvited to a Biden administration event. So they're even just excluding media.
Well, there's talk
Yeah.
now that they're going to be excluded from the White House newsroom, which I think is even more dangerous.
Right.
I mean, the New York Post, you can agree or disagree with their editorial line, but the New York Post is a serious journalistic outlet.
Yeah, it is. Now, I have a question about, as a matter of fact, later today, Kim Iverson's show, because, I work as a producer on that show. She did a long form interview with Chairman O'Malley, and that's coming later today with a Hoover Group. That's a long form hour interview. He has been indicted and is facing prison. He's 80 years old. He's been a Black socialist activist for 50 years. He has great community programs in Missouri that are lifting up an impoverished community there, like midwifery, farmers market, and all of that. And they've just recently been indicted. And I know you might have heard about it. Tucker Carlson covered it as well, thank goodness. And Katie Halper did, to her credit. And, these are 4 Americans that have no association with Russia and are being accused of being under the FARA Act and are facing prison. What is your thoughts on that? And oh, by the way, part of the indictment says they were sowing discord. That's the reasoning. Now, what does that sound like to you?
That sounds like a setup to me. There are so many things wrong with this case. First of all, nobody ever heard of this group until the Biden administration indicted them. They were harming no one. They were not violating the law, or if they were, there was no criminal intent, which nobody seems to care about anymore, whether or not somebody has criminal intent. And this goes, you used the word weaponization a moment ago. That's exactly what this is. It's the weaponization of an obscure law, something that many of us would call a throwaway felony or a process crime.
Mm-hmm. Administrative, yeah.
It's administrative. It's literally failure to fill out a form. Mm-hmm. Literally failure to fill out a form. You go to the FARA website, www.fara.whatever.gov, and you fill out the form. And if you forget, oh my God, it's a felony. Well, first of all, where's the criminal intent? Secondly, no one has proven that they were put up to this by any foreign government. The allegation is that it was somehow the Russians. The Russians, I highly doubt the Russians would spend their time and their money trying to prop up a group that has but a couple of dozen members who are elderly and are seeking to do nothing but support their own communities. And another thing too, again, coming back to this word weaponization, if you look at the federal sentencing guidelines for a FARA violation, the sentencing guideline is 0 to 6 months, okay? 0 to 6 months. Not even in prison, but in jail, because the sentence is too short to qualify for prison, right? Mm-hmm. So number one, why waste the taxpayers' time and money prosecuting a crime like that when you admittedly have no criminal intent? And number two, the FARA cases that the Trump and Biden administration have prosecuted so far, there have only been a couple, but they have gotten, in terms of sentences, far beyond what the federal sentencing guidelines have called for. For example, Maria Butina,
Yes.
who was convicted of a FARA violation. She was a graduate student, a Russian national graduate student here in the United States. She was
on a show, yeah.
Yeah, I've spoken to her a number of times, and she and I are Facebook friends even.
Right.
She was a member of the Russian version of the NRA. And she wanted to broker better relations between the NRA and this Russian gun organization. They called that at the Justice Department a FARA violation. Now, instead of getting 0 to 6 months, she was given 18 months in solitary confinement.
Right.
Now, anything over 2 weeks in solitary, the United Nations has deemed to be a form of torture.
Exactly.
And then as soon as she was released, she was expelled. Well, to me, that's clearly a political sentence on an administrative crime. But that's the rabbit hole that we're going down. And it's only getting worse and worse and worse. And we're seeing it in this Florida case now.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that case is, you know how they came across the Biden administration is they, well, actually part of the charges and the reason why they're saying 5 to 10 too is because of the, they're claiming election interference because they had run for, whatever. But they had interrupted, they had done an intervention, right, at an event that Obama was speaking at back when Obama was running. And it was in a key Black voting district, and they disrupted and were criticizing. All they were doing was criticizing Obama and that he wasn't really representing African-American interests. And that was the criticism. And, according to, their group, pretty much Biden's administration has been targeting him ever since. So
I'll tell you, if I were a member of this group, I would demand to go to trial. No settlement talks, no plea bargaining, trial by a jury of my peers.
Yeah.
I'd fight them.
And that's one thing. So let's go to Edward Snowden, because the reason why Edward Snowden won't come back is because he couldn't, he was a whistleblower and you know his case very well. So I'll let you speak more eloquently about it. But he won't come back because he couldn't defend himself, is what he's saying, under the Espionage Act. Could you explain that to the audience a little bit, that when you're accused of an Espionage Act, you can't really defend yourself?
No, we don't have something called a proactive defense here in the United States. When Ed Snowden first went public with his revelations, I wrote him 2 letters. One was an open letter that I sent to Arianna Huffington through my attorney, and Arianna published it because I wanted to get as broad coverage as I could. I wrote it from prison, and then I followed up with a private letter that I sent through a mutual friend who was going to Moscow to see him. You know what? And first, let me make another point. I really, really hate when people say that Ed Snowden defected to Moscow. He defected to the Russians. He did not. He was in the transit lounge of Moscow airport on his way to Ecuador when John Kerry revoked his passport and invalidated it. And so he was stuck there and couldn't travel. Kerry should have let him go to Ecuador. It would have been a lot easier to get him if you wanted to get him. But it's just simply not true that he defected to the Russians. Okay, with that said, I followed it up with a private letter, and I made several recommendations. I told him not to trust anybody, like literally don't trust anybody, because you just never know who is working for the FBI or who's going to rat you out to the FBI. I told him to cultivate his natural allies, especially those on Capitol Hill, because those relationships would save him in the end. And most importantly, I told him to hire the best lawyers money can buy. In fact, I went on to say, you should hire my lawyers because I had the best lawyers money can buy. Well, he did hire my lawyers. And he told me, and he told them as well, that he was willing to come back to the United States. He was willing to go on trial and willing to be found guilty and to be sent to prison for 20 years if he could stand up in court and explain why he did what he did. It's called an affirmative defense.
Mm-hmm.
And the Justice Department said, absolutely not. Now, he's telling them, I'll give you everything you want and I'll take 20 years. I just want to get up and say why I did it. They said, absolutely not. And so he's not come home. In the last couple of years, he's gotten Russian citizenship. His girlfriend, who was going back and forth, ended up marrying him. And they just had their second child about a year ago. He's working for, sort of the Russian version of Facebook. He's a programmer there.
Okay.
And and he has a perfectly happy life.
Good for him. I mean, I think, he's a young person that didn't need to give his life in such a way, because it's interesting how, he got the message through that we're under mass surveillance. People know it. It's like people accept it, but they don't know what to do about it. And it's just getting worse and worse, of course, with social media, as we know. And, something that my audience knows, and you may or may not know, is that the DOJ has recently opened a case, or they took my Twitter communications under sealed warrants. And a Twitter attorney told me that just before Elon Musk.
They did that to me too.
Yeah. And then, so there's this sealed case happening, but my name was apparently brought up and my communications all sealed and taken there, but I don't know what the case is about, or if I'm the primary person or part of a bigger case, or help or hurt me, or I don't even know. I know nothing. My attorney couldn't find out. No one can find out. Journalists have tried to find out. And it was, all I know is that it was during the Biden administration. So it's been publicized that, but so what are your thoughts about, like, I'm just a private citizen. I did come forward. I was a Senate staffer, as you know. I came forward about Biden with information, but like, what happens when the law enforcement agencies that are supposed to protect us are actually protecting politicians? Like, where are we?
We're in a very, very difficult position. And, I hate that we've become so politicized in this country, but I would say to you, or to somebody in a situation like the one you find yourself in, that you should run to Capitol Hill and engage with Senator Chuck Grassley's office, and maybe Jim Jordan's office, maybe Senator Johnson of Wisconsin's office, because you need high-powered support. This misuse of federal law enforcement is going to be the demise of all of us. The purpose of something like this, of a case like this, is generally not to send Tara Reade or John Kiriakou to prison for the longest possible sentence. The purpose is to bankrupt you and to ruin you, both personally and professionally. And they have to me too.
Yeah.
So that they slap you down. And at the same time, they frighten any other would-be whistleblower into keeping his or her mouth shut.
Yes.
A New York Times journalist told me that on the day of my arrest, literally every single one of the New York Times national security sources went silent, and they stayed silent for 6 months. That's exactly what the government wanted. Now, in my case, I was facing 45 years. I didn't get 45 years. I got 23 months.
That must have been terrifying, though. It was
terrible. It was terrible. It was either, do I roll the dice, knowing that according to ProPublica, the Justice Department wins 98.2% of its cases, or do I put a bullet in my head? I had 5 children at home. So what it ended up coming down to was from 45, they came down to 10, and then 8, and then 5. And they were stuck at 5 years for an entire year. And I said, no, I'm not going to take 5 years. I'm going to go to trial. And so we had a meeting with the Justice Department, and they said, look, 5 years, take it or leave it. And I said, I'm going to go to trial, and I'm going to testify on my own behalf. And I might over the course of my testimony, accidentally talk about some of the hideous crimes against humanity and war crimes that I witnessed in 15 years at the CIA. And then they came down to 23 months, which I actually also turned down. So they gave me 24 hours to take it. They said, best and final offer, 30 months, you do 23. And my wife and I stayed up all night long, literally all night long. And we decided that I'd turn it down and we would go to trial. Because I said naively that once I got in front of a jury, they would see how ridiculous this was and I would be acquitted. And then finally, one of my attorneys, the one who I liked and respected the most, got literally right in my face. He was furious. And he said, you know what your problem is? Your problem is you think this is about justice. And it's not about justice. It's about mitigating damage. Take the deal. And then the other attorney said, look, this could be a blip in your life, or it could be the defining event of your life. Make it the blip. And so I took the deal.
I think that secondary advice is interesting. And you were put in such a difficult position. I admire your courage and the way you held your ground.
Thanks.
I don't know if I would have that fortitude. That is amazing fortitude that you had, particularly with so many people in your life that needed you present and, supporting and being there. And I'm glad that they were there for you.
Thank you. Thank you. They were.
So now looking back on that decision, and I know you said you have zero regrets. You said that at the top of this conversation. What do you feel like there was any impact by your whistleblowing? Has there been any change or movement that's been positive? Do you still feel there's a battle about the torture techniques and what's being done?
Yeah, there will always be a battle, always. But I'm very proud to say, actually, I'll recount for you a story.
Okay.
About 6 weeks before I was released from prison, I called my wife. Now she's my ex-wife, but I called my wife. And I was allowed to call every other day for 15 minutes. So I called and I said, hey, how was your day? And she said, it was great. And I said, really? Great? Why? And she said, because the Senate torture report was released today. And John McCain got up on the floor of the Senate and said that the country owed you a debt of gratitude, that without your whistleblowing, the American people would never have known what the CIA was doing in their name.
Wow. And
that made it worth it. The Congress formally banned torture thanks to the McCain-Feinstein Amendment. And John McCain said that that was because of me. And so, sure, there was a price to pay. But this case, one of my attorneys said this in the very beginning of the case. He said, this case is so much bigger than John Kiriakou. He said, this case isn't about you. You just happen to be the guy that is the face of it. But this case is about human rights and civil liberties. That's why the media is so interested in it. So was it worth like banning torture in our country in exchange for 23 months in a low security prison? You bet it was. Totally worth it. I gave an interview to the BBC one time, and it was kind of a confrontational interview. And about halfway into it, the interviewer says, one of the things that I'm struck by is that you're not showing any remorse or regret at all for your crimes. And I said, I have no remorse or regret. I'll never have remorse or regret. I would do it again. I would do it again today. Somebody should have done it before I did it. So no, I'm not going to express any remorse or regret because I don't feel it.
Yeah, and it is remarkable how your legacy has really, like Edward Snowden's, you raise the public consciousness about things they simply weren't aware of, and that in of itself is a heroic act. And Julian Assange the same. Yes, Julian Assange is being punished now, and basically, in my eyes, it's like he's being slowly executed in front of us, right? And it's horrible. But I think, there was a glimmer of hope with that letter he just put out there, the new King of England, when it was a very thoughtful, interesting letter that Stella had published, that he had written. Now, what are your thoughts about RFK has come on the stage running for office? Some people say that he's going to be a sheep herder. He's going to take the independent votes and put them into the Democrats, and in the end endorse Biden. But there's something interesting going on. He has said that he would pardon Julian Assange, that he would have those charges dropped, the extradition, and he would also do that for Edward Snowden. And now Caroline Kennedy is apparently in talks with Australian officials about Julian Assange on behalf of the Biden administration. And there might be like this little tit for tat between Biden and RFK about like who lets Julian Assange go first, which would benefit Julian Assange, right? And humanity in general. What are your thoughts about RFK's run and the criticism of him being basically a sheep herder and all of that regarding those two cases?
I'm proud to say that I consider Bob Kennedy to be a friend. Mm-hmm. And he told me about 2 weeks before he announced his candidacy that he intended to publish those tweets about pardoning Julian, Ed, Jeffrey Sterling, Reality Winner, Daniel Hale, Chelsea Manning, and me. And I never brought it up. And he wasn't in touch with any of the other whistleblowers. He did it because he believes in it, right? He went public because he believes that's the right thing to do. I think the world of Bob Kennedy. I disagree with him on some issues. I think, it's just not possible to agree with a political figure on every single issue. But he's a truly good-hearted man. He wants only what's best for the country. Mm-hmm. And I think that he's willing to forge his own path. Now, with that said, I told him quite pointedly the last time I talked to him that the polls show that he is more popular among right-leaning independents than he is among Democrats. Now, his poll numbers in the Democratic primary so far are strong. 19% and 21% against an incumbent president. Those are strong numbers right there.
Strong enough for them not to want to have a primary. Yeah. Debate.
Strong enough for them to not want to have a primary or debates. But he's adamant that he will not run as an independent. He just simply won't do it. So I think that your scenario is probably correct. I think that he intends to get his ideas out there, to get his policy proposals out there, and in the end, he'll likely endorse Joe Biden. Now, one of the things that the people around him are hopeful of is a repeat of the 1968 election, where Eugene McCarthy, who was a senator from the Democratic Party's left wing, ran against Lyndon Johnson in the New Hampshire primary. And McCarthy got something like 32%. This was so shocking to Johnson, an incumbent president, that he immediately took himself out of the race. Now, Bob's polling numbers are strongest in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and California. And I think the people around him are hopeful that if he can put up serious numbers in those 5 states, that it's possible that he could push Joe Biden out of the race. I think that's what they're hoping for.
Well, let's see. Another thing about the CIA that he raised up, which I found interesting, and because you were part of the CIA for so long, he put it out there with no uncertain terms. Now, you and I have talked, so you know that I had volunteered for the RFK Memorial back in the past, and I'd known members of the Kennedy family. One of my good friends worked for Ted Kennedy, and Ted Kennedy was very adamant that they not talk about the assassination with his family. I mean, that the family publicly not talk about some of the theories around who really assassinated JFK. And Oliver Stone has done some incredible introspective documentaries on it. A recent one he just did. But what was startling was RFK tweeted out that the CIA was basically responsible, partly responsible, if not all responsible, for the assassination of JFK, and his father involved with that. And I think what really startled me was that the mainstream media just went silent. There was nothing about it. You only saw it on what you consider independent or Republican leaning. So what are your thoughts on that and what he said, is particularly with your experience in the CIA?
He believes that. And I'll tell you, I've come around to believe it as well. I think there's enough documentary evidence out there, maybe not to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law, but the preponderance of the evidence is such that I think he's probably right. He told me a story once that was just chilling to me. It's stuck in my mind since he said it. He said that on November 22nd, 1963, his mom picked him up early from school, right? Picked him up at I think he said it was 2:00. His uncle had just been assassinated an hour earlier. And when they got home, he lived in a very well-known house called Hickory Hill in McLean, Virginia, less than a half a mile from the CIA's headquarters. When he got home, he got out of the car, and his father was standing in the driveway talking to John McCone, who was the director of the CIA, director of Central Intelligence at the time. Now, McCone was a very, very close friend of the Kennedy family. Just after John Kennedy named John McCone as the director of CIA, McCone's wife developed cancer, and she died very quickly. And he was so distraught that the Kennedys were afraid he was going to harm himself. And so he had dinner with the Kennedys every single night. He would leave the CIA, he would go to Hickory Hill, he'd swim in the pool, and then they would all have dinner together. So Bob said that when he got out of the car, and he was 9 or 10 years old at the time, he walked past his father, who was deep in conversation with McCone, and he overheard his father say, "Tell me your people didn't do this." And McCone responded, "I don't know who did it." He didn't say, "Of course my people didn't do it."
Right.
He genuinely didn't know if the CIA did it. And I think Oliver Stone's conclusions are correct, although Oliver and I have gone back and forth over this a couple of times in not very nice language. But I think that it was elements of the CIA that did it. I would guarantee to you that this was not a policy where John McCone, who's the best friend of Robert Kennedy, said, "We need to kill the president." Or even James Angleton, "We need to kill the president." I don't believe that ever happened. But I believe that there were elements of the CIA known as rogue officers who later went on to even greater infamy, who were probably involved. And I think that a lot of it came from the residual effects of the Bay of Pigs invasion and the fact that John Kennedy had spoken about breaking up the CIA.
Right, abolishing it. So, and that leads me to this question, and then I wanted to, because we are live, we have other people, we have the audience is able to ask some questions. So we'll go
great.
Before we do, that leads me to another question about, because you were employed by them. Do you think the CIA and FBI should be abolished?
Yes.
Or reformed?
That's an easy one. Yes. They are rogue organizations. They are law-breaking organizations. They are unable to exist as lawful, law-abiding entities. And frankly, there's so much overlap in government, Tara, that we don't need a CIA. The State Department has the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, which does analysis. The Pentagon has Defense Human Services that does human source collection. NSA and a half a dozen other DoD organizations do electronic intelligence. We don't need the CIA for its Department of its Directorate of Science and Technology. All of that is done elsewhere. We just don't need it. And besides, since 9/11, the CIA has become, well, let me back up and reword that. Before 9/11, the CIA's job was very, very easy. It was very specific. It was to recruit spies to steal secrets, and then to analyze those secrets and to provide the analysis to the policymakers so that they could make the best informed policy possible. They went rogue and had to be reined in 1975 with the Church and Pike committees on Capitol Hill. They were good for a while. They went rogue again, with Iran-Contra. But after 9/11, it became a paramilitary organization. So the analysis is secondary, maybe even tertiary. Now they're more concerned about, sending assassination squads around the world to kill perceived enemies, carrying out international kidnappings and rendering people to, in many cases, third countries to be tortured. They set up an archipelago of secret prisons. They founded a torture program that we just sort of have to take their word for it, is over now. So no, I don't think the CIA should even exist. The FBI, I've come to the same conclusion, that the FBI will entrap Americans for political reasons. This is how they get promoted. Think of it this way, and not just the FBI, but federal prosecutors as well. None of them get promoted by not arresting you, right? None of them get promoted by not prosecuting you.
Right.
So if an FBI agent says, I need to go to court and get a warrant for Tara Reade's Twitter DMs and her emails, and then looks at it and says, "Oh no, she's okay. I'm not gonna prosecute her." Well, what's he gonna say in his promotion panel? Well, I looked at Tara Reade, but she was innocent, so I moved on. They're not gonna promote him for that. They're gonna promote him if he says, I looked at her and there was no smoking gun, but there might be something there. I think we ought to get her phones and put a surveillance team on her and see who she's talking to. Oh, that's initiative. That's how you get promoted. But then in the meantime, the FBI ends up going after, like this group in the African whatever, the Uhuru group in Florida. They end up going after idiots who are easily entrapped and tricked into pulling off phony terrorist attacks, like we saw in Seattle and in Portland and in Cleveland and elsewhere, where it was the FBI that provided the explosives, the FBI that provided the detonators and made up the operation, and then grabbed everybody involved when there really was no terrorist attack being planned in the first place. It was the FBI's idea. So yeah, neither one of them has any room in a civilized society.
You're right. I mean, and it goes to the military industrial complex as well. I mean, defense contractors and the like. It's like if there's an incentive for death and war and destruction, then that's what you're going to get, particularly when money's involved. So Reef, I wanted to bring you in to see if there's any questions for John.
Yeah, I have one, two actually.
Okay.
You were, John, at a event not too long ago in front of the DOJ, talking about Assange, and I think it was the anniversary of his arrest, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Right, Misty Winston put that on, and you were the savior of the day. You had an interesting experience that day. If you could speak to your experiences, that would be nice.
That was the strangest, not just the strangest day, that was like the strangest event I've ever participated in. I never say no to an Assange event. And what I usually do, they're usually held right outside the Justice Department. And I finish my radio show at 2:00, and then I just walk over to DOJ and speak my piece. And it's usually the same 75 or 100 people who show up. So I press the flesh and say hi to everybody and, slap people on the back and give hugs and whatever. And I gave my 5-minute speech, and Jerry Condon spoke after I did. Jerry Condon from Veterans for Peace. And I was sort of off to the side talking to Joe Loria from Consortium News. And while I'm talking, Joe says, "Oh, here we go, a streaker." And I turn and look, and this young guy, looked to be in his mid-20s or so, is standing in front of the podium where Jerry Condon is speaking, and he strips completely naked. And he does it quickly, right? He's so nervous, he's shaking, like visibly shaking, to the point where he had trouble getting his pants off because he was so nervous. And I thought, it's always something.
Mm-hmm.
But then he reaches down, his jeans are at his feet. He reaches down and pulls a bottle of Sterno out of his jeans pocket, and he douses himself in Sterno and then douses his clothes, drops the bottle, reaches back into the pocket and pulls out a lighter. And so he's nervously trying to light the lighter to set himself on fire. And in the meantime, Joe Loria is live streaming this for Consortium News, and Ford Fisher is live streaming it as well on Twitter. So I shout, "Don't do it, buddy. Don't do it, buddy." But he's shaking so much he can't get the lighter lid. Skip Kaltenhouse, who's an attorney, a Julian supporter who's always at these events, Skip ran up to him first and slapped the lighter out of his hand. And the guy reaches over to get the lighter, and I run and I shove him as hard as I could. And I pushed him a good 8 or 10 feet so that he was not close enough to the lighter to pick it up. And then I kicked the lighter, and it went behind Jerry Condon. The guy couldn't have gotten the lighter by then. And I shouted at the guy. I don't even know why I said this. I don't want to swear if I'm not allowed to swear, but
you can swear, it's fine.
I said, "You fucking idiot. If you set yourself on fire, we'll never get a permit to demonstrate here again." I don't know why I said that. I mean, the guy was clearly mentally ill. But anyway, he had a brand new tattoo all the way across his stomach that was very like red and irritated and inflamed. Like he had just gotten it that day or the day before. And it said #free Assange. It went all the way across his torso. Finally, after I shoved him, and I shoved him hard enough that he fell down onto the ground, a cop ran over and got him and cuffed him, put his pants back on him, and then sat him down on the curb. There was an attorney in the audience who ran up and said, "I'm an attorney. I'll represent him for the purpose of this arrest." And she told me later that the cop took him to a hospital. He didn't take him to the police station. No charge was ever filed. They took him for a mental health evaluation, which, much to my surprise, was really the appropriate thing to do. But I will say it was Skip Kaltenhouse who was the hero that day. Skip is the one that got to him first and batted the lighter out of his hand.
Yeah, you were considered a hero as well for what you did. So thank you for that. Saved a lot of that saved that person's life. That was good.
Never saw anything
you had a
like
second audience member question.
Yeah, let me scroll back up to it. It's about hold on 2 seconds.
You've got time.
I know, right? It was about I have a ton of chat to like scroll through, so I had to find it. It was right at the beginning, and I wanted to get to it.
Okay, take your time.
While you're looking, I'm going to do a shameless plug.
Okay.
For my Substack.
Okay.
johnkiriakou.substack.com. Thank you very much.
So
I was going to do that towards the end, but now we have it in the middle, and we have it in the people will be able to see. So people in the description. Go ahead.
What does John think of the New World Press Freedom Index for 2023? If you're aware of that.
That's a good question. Yeah. The U.S. has dropped precipitously in the World Press Freedom Index. I think this year we're like 43rd or 46th or something like that. We're behind, like Bosnia Herzegovina and behind Costa Rica. We're supposed to be number one. right? We
Right.
pride ourselves. We brag to the rest of the world of what lovers of freedom and transparency that we are. And that's just nonsense. That's nonsense. And listen, I don't care how free you want people to think your press is. If you're working to keep somebody like Julian Assange in prison, or in the equivalent of prison, in the equivalent of solitary confinement for the last, 11 years, you don't have a free press. You don't. And my guess is, because the UN's onto us on this issue, it's only going to get worse every year. It'll just keep getting worse.
Yeah. Yep, you're absolutely right. And, you know, I wanted to, because we have a few minutes left, I wanted you to take this time you can plug your Substack again, but also talk about your work with Sputnik and how that came about, and any parting thoughts you wanted to say to the audience, just as we're in a time of, you know, and Twitter just got a new CEO who happens to be the chair of the World Economic Forum, as well as she was an employee until today of NBC. So maybe give us some parting thoughts on that, and then also where people can follow your work, and how you kind of came across doing your radio show with Sputnik and whatnot.
Oh, thank you. In 2000, or in very early 2017, I got a call from Sputnik offering me a radio show, and I turned it down. I said, thanks, I just don't think I can work for the Russians. But thanks anyway. Thanks for thinking of me. I didn't have much of a job. I was a visiting fellow at a think tank here in Washington, but I had to raise my own salary, so I was only making minimum wage. So about 6 months later, Sputnik came back and they offered me a show again. And I said, well, I don't know. I said, if I do a show, I would want the freedom to talk about anything I wanted and to criticize anybody I wanted, including Vladimir Putin. And the Washington bureau chief said, done. I said, really? Are you willing to put that in writing? Put it in the contract? He said, done. So they did. They put it in the contract. And I took the job. And I've been doing a show there ever since August of 2017. Now, I will say that they have been true to their word. If we're going to be peaceniks, if we're going to be lovers of peace, then we've got to be lovers of peace. And so on the day that Russian troops crossed the border into Ukraine, I said at the start of my show, I unreservedly condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I urge that Russian troops withdraw immediately. Now, I understand why the Russians did it. I understand the recent history of Ukraine going back to 2014-ish. I understand U.S. intervention and interference in Ukraine, but, you know, war is wrong. And I criticize the U.S. for its myriad wars, so I feel compelled to criticize Russia for its wars too. And you know what? Nobody has ever asked me to say something or to not say something at Sputnik. And not only has that not held me back, but I regularly, routinely appear on RT, Russia Today, in interviews. And there's been very, very generous with me. I also write for Consortium News. I have for years, since 2015. I write for Covert Action magazine and also the Scheer Post, the Bob Scheer's outlet from the University of Southern California. I'm an adjunct professor at the University of Salamanca, Spain.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, which has been a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping to start a podcast in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
So, that I'm going to pair with my Substack. My Substack's called Loud and Clear with John Kiriakou, and the podcast is going to be Loud and Clear. So, yeah.
What's your platform, may I ask? What are you? Are you just going to do what I'm doing, which is to kind of broadcast on different platforms? Are you going to be independent, or do you have someone?
No, we intend to put it everywhere. I have a sound engineer and a producer who understand these things because they're both younger than I am. And so they told me just the other day when we were trying to set up the equipment that that it'll be on like 11 or 12 platforms, and we'll just hope for the
Fabulous.
best. Yeah.
All right. So,
one of the fun things.
when is your premiere, and how can people find you to watch it?
We're hoping the premiere is going to be in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
And probably the easiest place to find it at the very beginning is going to be on YouTube. But
Okay.
it'll be called Loud and Clear with John Kiriakou.
Warning on YouTube, I get taken down and demonetized regularly for saying the word Vladimir Putin or Russia.
I've heard that.
So,
Yes.
or abolishing the CIA. All of those phrases and words get you taken down. Apparently RFK too. That's what happened to
Yes.
Kim's YouTube was struck recently. And
I gave an interview to a guy in Tampa not too long ago, and it was deplatformed for the same reason.
Yeah.
on
So I don't,
YouTube.
but Rumble's good. They
Yeah.
don't censor. Twitter for now. Who knows what the future
For
will
now.
bring.
Speaking of, it leads me to one last question before we wrap. What does John
Okay.
think of Elon choosing Linda Yaccarino to replace him as Twitter's CEO?
Yeah.
WEF chair.
Yeah, I don't think much. I did a paper a couple of years ago for Code Pink about the WEF and Bilderberg and a couple of these other meetings of the swells where the rich and the famous meet to think the big thoughts and impose their will on the rest of us.
Right.
It's not as otherworldly conspiratorial as you might think, but it's still dangerous. And to take the head of the World Economic Forum and a woman who was quite literally able to financially save NBC by monetizing it beyond its wildest dreams, I think sends really the wrong message, especially after Elon said just a few months ago that the reason he bought Twitter was to save it as a bastion for free speech. Well, if you're going to put a corporate swell in charge of your bastion for free speech, I can't imagine that it's going to remain that bastion for much longer. So
Right.
I'm worried about it.
Yeah, I think many of us are.
Yeah.
It'll be a wait and see game, but I see some Democrat operatives cheering it on, and that's a huge red flag. That means,
yes.
yeah. So
Agreed.
we'll see. And I mean, you know what though? We'll get another platform if he blows it and Twitter becomes a wasteland of basically a State Department messaging service. We'll go somewhere else.
Yes.
So
That's
right?
it. We'll go somewhere else. Precisely.
We'll go somewhere else. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know you have a busy schedule, and I just appreciated this conversation. I learned so much from you, and
thank you,
every
Tara.
time I listen to you. So
thanks so much. It was a pleasure, and thanks for those great questions.
Sure, and come back anytime. We'd love to have you. All right.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
So thank you to everyone who was listening and who posed some questions. We'll be back next time. Until then, take care.